How am I this not entertained by a movie where Black Manta gets eaten by a shark? The following is an in-depth story analysis. If you haven't seen this film, you might want to before watching this review. Man, I wish I hadn't seen the live-action Aquaman movie before reviewing this. I'm going to avoid a lot of direct comparisons, but suffice it to say, I just walked out of a really exciting, fun, fast-paced, bright-colored, epic adventure film. And then I had to watch this, which is, not that at all. Throne of Atlantis is the second Justice League movie in the DC direct-to-video animated continuity based on the New 52, or third if you count the Flashpoint paradox. There's also an awful Batman movie before this, Son of Batman. It's another movie I'm reviewing out of order, but today's requester, Ian McKee, probably picked it because Aquaman was coming out. It's not a direct adaptation of Jeff Johns' much-loved Aquaman/Justice League event, Throne of Atlantis, and both the credits and box are careful to cover their bases, saying, inspired by the graphic novel, like the producers know they're going to disappoint fans. It's not disappointing just because it's different, although that material is so ripe for adaptation, as seen in the aforementioned live-action version, which takes a lot of its cues from the Johns run overall and Throne of Atlantis in particular. It would be hard just reading it to imagine how you screw it up. If they wanted to go some other direction, and this was just really loosely based on it, cool, but this is not interesting and really boring in comparison. Sure, there's some background stuff in John's arc you'd have to truncate, but that stands on its own quite well and could pretty much be adapted straight off the page, just trimmed enough to fit the 80-minute time limit. It's such a splashy, grand story filled with action and Shakespearean-esque intrigue. It's a great choice for one of these, and there's not so much material that it would have to be horribly condensed. I've complained a lot that these DC animated features have often picked stories that were just too massive to do in the time frame of 2 episodes on television with the commercials taken out. That was a big problem before this New 52-based relaunch. You had movies like All-Star Superman, where huge swaths of the story had to be cut, and they weren't retooled to work as their own piece, as a more simplified but complete version. They just felt gutted, and often like the emphasis was on the wrong things. Time was wasted with unnecessarily long action scenes that would have been better served drawing characters and, telling the story. Later on, bigger stories that were popular enough to warrant it were split into 2 movies, so they'd have the breathing room they needed to do the material justice, and that worked brilliantly for The Dark Knight Returns. The same is being done now with The Death of Superman and Reign of the Supermen, and some of the picks have gotten smarter. Now we sometimes have the opposite problem, like with Gotham by Gaslight, a story that's too short for this time frame, so a lot of new stuff is added and it feels a little padded. Some of that works great, and some of it not so much. Throne of Atlantis is a story that I think is easily adapted into 80 minutes without messing with it too much. But once again, the focus is in the wrong place. This time, not so much on boring action scenes, although the action is pretty unremarkable in this, but on continuity. A continuity that I just can't bring myself to care about. The emphasis seems to be on begrudging heroes. That's the main thing the sequel takes from war and runs with it. And it just happens to be the thing I hate the most about these. Luckily, we start to get past it later, presumably because this continuity, for whatever reason, continues past the end of the New 52, when Rebirth starts and corrects a lot of mistakes from that very long, very awkward and uneven era in DC Comics history. The comics were only a year away from abandoning the New 52 direction when this came out, but it had its head firmly buried in those sensibilities. Moody for no good reason, characters who don't like each other for no good reason, in a bleak world that needs heroes, but with heroes who would rather be doing something else, and only help because they're obligated. The New 52 wasn't all like that, nor did it majoritively stay that way, and the bigger problems there were with editorial tying writers' hands behind their backs and not allowing creators the freedom to realize their own visions, and with the way the whole thing was conceptualized in the first place, halfway rebooting the universe instead of starting over completely, which made things confusing, both for readers and, considering all the confusing continuity, for the writers and artists themselves. But the problem with the New 52 direction for these movies is that for a long time, they ran with that initial super serious without the substance to warrant it tone from Jeff Johns' first Justice League arc. which again the comics got away from. And that is maddeningly dull and about as generic as comic book alien invasion stories get. His run immediately took a turn for the better. These movies did not, and war was quite a bit worse than the source material. The New 52 movies don't get away from that attitude until Justice League vs. Teen Titans, the first of these after like 6 that I finally legitimately liked. But still, not because I liked any of the Justice League characters themselves. It goes out of its way to make everyone one note, flat, and wooden, but also brooding and jaded, and a lot of them without a good story to get them there or justify it. I'm not looking for super friends, but hardly anyone gets along is just as unbelievable and boring without any character depth as everyone gets along. It's just the opposite extreme. And yes, by Throne of Atlantis, Superman and Wonder Woman are dating, which the movie doesn't spend enough time with and feels shoehorned in because that's what was happening in the comics at the time, but there's still this incessant need for at least most of our heroes to not be proactive until they're forced to get off their duffs and work together. These feel desperate to be seen as adult superhero movies, like a darker alternative to the MCU, just like the DCEU. And they have a similar problem. They want to convince us that unmotivated heroes that don't play well with others are instantly more realistic and relatable. That's what real people are like, right? Well, sometimes. People are complicated, though, and if you're gonna make your heroes conflicted and deal with how much more difficult it would be to be a superhero in the real world, like how hard it would be to have the powers of Superman or Wonder Woman and get a distrusting public on your side, you have to get into the meat of those ideas and into the motivation and psychology of these heroes. But these movies tend to oversimplify the delicate and complex social and political issues and tell really by-the-numbers, throwaway Saturday morning superhero stories with surface, mature stuff just thrown in. A little violence, swearing, and jerk-facery doesn't make your story more sophisticated. It just makes me wish I was watching a confident and creative example of either of the things you're not doing well. Big, loud, fun, stupid superhero stuff, or deep, complex, character-driven sci-fi or fantasy. It ends up feeling like a disposable dime-a-dozen superhero film. And the half-hearted attempt at edgy action, mature themes, and adult humor make it hard to enjoy even as a mindless adventure. There are big fights, there are jokes, there is the absurdity inherent in the situation, but there is no real fun to be had here. Rather than dropping us into a regular Justice League status quo months into our heroes' career as a team, where they've been working together in adventures we haven't seen, like the Avengers have maybe been doing before Age of Ultron, our heroes still aren't working together. They're awestruck at the end of war that people are actually grateful to them for saving the world, and that they're not looking at them like scary overlords. But they still don't really want to be a team. So when Atlanteans attack a submarine and it looks like there could be a full-scale war from a group of people no one even knows exist, there's no Justice League right away to look into it. Steve Trevor is trying to put together a league, like he does in the 52 comics, this weird dude bro version of Trevor who has bleached blonde hair but a brown goatee that doesn't match. I don't know, just makes him look like a jerk. But then a lot of guys in this movie look like jerks because of their personal grooming habits. Why do so many men, including Aquaman, have mutton chops? Anyway, Trevor is sort of pretending like there's a league when there's not. There's an HQ and a sign he has to take down that says Super 7, a callback to an unfunny joke in the first movie. Justice League focus tested better, he says, but it doesn't matter because there isn't a team anyway. What, is he just hoping that there will be another global crisis? The team will show back up again and then formally continue being a government-sanctioned team, even though they didn't do that the first time around? Well, I guess so, because he puts out a call and almost no one shows up. Cyborg takes his call and says, no matter what you would like the world to think, there is no Justice League. So I guess Trevor is using the idea of a league to make the country feel safer. Cyborg gets Flash to show up, but everyone else needs another superhero to come to them and make it clear that things are serious and they're really needed, even though they all got the call. Really? Superman doesn't show up? Until Flash and Shazam are standing outside the restaurant he and Wonder Woman are having dinner at? And yeah, guys, that doesn't jeopardize their secret identities. I'm confused on this point. Did Superman get the memo and ignore it, or did he somehow miss it? Cyborg acts like no one but the Flash responded to a message they all got. Wow. Some heroes. But if there's any chance of a big global catastrophe, they're not gonna show up and at least look into it? Okay. This is one of two huge mistakes made in the conception of this movie. We're still in origin territory while trying to tell a political story about foreign relations between modern and ancient forgotten city-states. I'm interested in the Atlantis stuff. I want to know about that culture, and I want to know how Aquaman fits in. I don't care about the Justice League. Partly because I didn't like any of these characters last time around, but mostly because they get in the way of a potentially far more interesting story than the standard alien invasion we saw last time. Why are we using up precious real estate with another getting the band back together plot? It's like it's trepidatious about being an Aquaman story, so it tries to put the League front and center, treating Atlantis as the excuse to bring our characters back and Aquaman as a subplot, instead of letting Aquaman be the real protagonist and using the Justice League as the supporting cast. I'm not saying it couldn't be a bona fide Justice League story where some of our characters get real arcs and learn something through this experience, but because it's not doing that and just kind of pretends to, all the Justice League stuff feels pointless. John's Throne of Atlantis is an event that weaves in and out of the Aquaman and Justice League titles, but while there's stuff for the other characters to do, it is Arthur's story. I really expected that here too, that the Justice League title would just be used to sell the movie because Warner's doesn't, or didn't then, they've learned since then, think any names will sell except Batman, Superman, or Justice League. That's done really well later, again in Justice League vs. Teen Titans, where the Justice League get mind-controlled and aren't the focus of most of the movie. It is an easily contrived situation, but it creates an excuse to make a real Teen Titans movie. And after that, the Titans finally got a movie without anyone else's name in the title, adapting its most famous comic book story, The Judas Contract, which is a project Bruce Timm's team had planned to make years earlier and had to scrap. It's unfortunately not very good either, but we're branching out like we tried to do years ago, with Wonder Woman and Green Lantern and trying other characters on their own. Though I'm sure the popularity of the Arrow and Flash TV shows have something to do with that as well. But no, everything is made ostensibly to serve this new ongoing series of Justice League movies. You'd think I'd appreciate that the sandbox is already set up so the movie doesn't have to introduce everything at once. It can be awkward to tell some of these big, universe-sprawling stories in a one-movie continuity. But given this approach, I wish it wasn't building on anything. These are structured and presented like summer blockbusters. Each is supposed to be a big event, nothing of consequence happens in between them, and we have to take time to reacquaint the audience with everyone and treat it like a big deal that we're seeing them all again, before we finally get on with the story. A lot of this movie, apart from when we're focused on Arthur and the Atlantis mythology, feels like war again. We put the band back together, mostly one by one. We do some investigation, which leads us to the evil plot. We fight a big, faceless, alien-looking army, and the climax happens where all boring, generic superhero climaxes happen, in the middle of a big, empty, metropolitan street, even though this is a movie all about Atlantis. You'd think we'd be in or near water at the end, but nope. Looks like every superhero movie you've ever seen. And it even does the same irritating thing a lot of recent prequel or reimagining big-budget series have done, where the main character or characters don't become who we classically remember them as until the end of the second movie, effectively making the two movies a combined origin story to set up a third, which is finally what you came to see in the first place. Abrams' Star Trek series is like this, with Star Trek Into Darkness as our Craig's Bond films. Our heroes don't agree to continue on as the Justice League until they've helped save the world from being taken over by Ocean Master and his army. And Batman basically says, you know, we probably should keep this thing going if there's going to be more threats like this, and everyone, for no reason except this is where the series has finally decided it should happen, are like, yeah, okay, fine, whatever. And it's weird that Batman, of all people, initiates this, by the way, considering he's the last person to agree to show up, and he acts like he has the Atlantean thing well in hand himself. Hal Jordan comes to Gotham and tells his least favorite person on the planet, who he hates for no good reason, that they all need to reunite, and Batman already knows what it's all about. He runs point the whole movie, acting as de facto leader and bosses everyone else around, with an attitude like, they want my help, fine, but if not, whatever. I'm Batman. I'll figure it out. Superman even says, who made him the leader? But everyone goes with it anyway. They should all be a little suspicious of Batman, actually, wanting to continue with the team at the end. If he's suggesting they make it official, he's also probably doing it with the intention of calling all the shots. It's not apparent that this Batman has any compassion whatsoever, except that he saves people. He's more despondent and closed off than most versions, and he insults some of his other team members unnecessarily and often, seeming not to take them very seriously. He has the stupidest line in the whole movie, where he takes a pot shot at Superman just because they're supposed supposed to butt heads. We don't deal with the differences in their worldview or ideologies. No time for that. Gotta eat it up with mediocre banter. We just get a quick scene to remind us that they don't get along or really respect each other. It would be nice to see these characters' relationships evolve. Again, the closest we get is Superman and Wonder Woman, and that mostly happens off-screen. They're already an item when the movie begins. So, I guess at least something has happened in between movies. But anyway, they're investigating Dr. Shin's house, the scientist who publicly claims to be researching Atlantis and can prove that it exists. Batman doesn't take Superman seriously as a detective, and Superman says, well, I am an investigative reporter, which is a good point. We often don't think about Superman as a detective, but even though he's not likely to ever be as good as Batman, he should have some skills in that department, considering all the primary research he has to do as a journalist. And Batman responds with, journalism is dead. There's no more discussion. They just continue to explore the room. But wait, Batman, what does that mean? Journalism is dead? I get print is dead. I get traditional journalism is dead. I would understand if you had a problem with mainstream media, corporate bias and whatnot, but that is the most dense, nonsensical blanket statement I've ever heard, and coming from Batman, no less. Batman doesn't believe in journalists finding the truth and giving the people the facts. There was clearly zero thought whatsoever put into that line and its mind-boggling implications. The second major problem with this movie on a conceptual level is using it as an origin story for Aquaman, and that begins with not including him in the first movie and replacing him with Shazam, which I think was done to A, shove in a comic relief character, which didn't do anything to make that movie feel less hollow or joyless, and he doesn't help here either. I get that Billy Batson's a kid, but kissy noises at Superman and Wonder Woman? Really? And B, to give him some exposure and train the world to call him Shazam instead of Captain Marvel. Now, I suppose that just because Arthur wasn't in the first movie didn't mean he couldn't already know some things about what he is and where he comes from before the movie starts. But that's not what's done here. And given his stinger at the end of that movie, it seems this was a deliberate choice because this movie was intended to be a typical thrust into a destiny you didn't know you had origin. And possibly because it expects that people don't know anything about Aquaman and they might be confused if he knows too much before the story begins. So they try to make him the eyes-in character, even though he's really unlikable, and I'm waiting for him to get off screen every time he's on screen. So instead of a story about an Aquaman who is already a son of two worlds and has to bridge the gap in order to keep the peace, he's Neo from the Matrix. He has a crappy life, he's really unhappy, in this case, he's practically ready to throw in the towel, like bordering on suicidal, and then finds out he's the prince of the lost city of Atlantis, and that his brother Orm wants to kill everyone on the surface because something revenge for the death of his father at the hands of a volcano that no surface dwellers were responsible for at all. But I guess he was raised by his father to hate humans, so he's just looking for an excuse. He talks about the safety of Atlantis a lot at the end, too, suddenly, and I think that's just another flimsy justification. So in the span of 80 minutes, with a lot of pointless non-character progressing material for our other protagonist, which I'll talk about a little bit later, our fish-out-of-water character, who I guess is more like a person in the water, but it's effectively the same thing, goes from knowing nothing about who he is or what he can do, hating his life and whining constantly, to having the qualities of a great leader, as Wonder Woman says at the end. She also acts like he's really eloquent, and his speech is nothing special. He's supposed to be totally ready to take the throne after the tragic and predictable death of his mother at the hands of a brother he didn't know he had, and who he has now dethroned, even though he hasn't had any training in anything and didn't have the sense to stay out of bar fights 3 days earlier. It's far more believable and far less of a standard chosen one who's only special by blood story if Arthur has had some experience, has some skills, both in and out of the water. There's no Voldo here to train him when he's younger. His mother, it seems, didn't raise him at all, so he doesn't know anything about Atlantis from her, and there's also no joy in his life. His first line in the movie sums him up perfectly. Life sucks. He's an alcoholic who's letting himself fall apart because his dad died. Yeah, that's horrible, and I guess you can start Aquaman's journey to be a superhero from that place, but to get him to King of Atlantis from there is rushed and beyond far-fetched. Arthur replaces depression with duty and fame. At first, when Mira explains his birthright, he's overwhelmed, and he responds like Clark Kent from Smallville might, by running off and moping. By the end, when he's in his Aquaman suit, which he's only wearing because he strips down to it from the armor Mira gave him while doing some more whining and moping, and then never puts the armor back on even when he does embrace his Atlantean heritage. It seems like Arthur finally wants to be king in like more of a Simba from the Lion King sort of way. I'm not sure he really understands the responsibility or the magnitude of the job. I'm also not sure the movie knows why he's finally changing his attitude about this, except we need that triumphant moment where Arthur takes his rightful place on the throne because it's, called Throne of Atlantis. It seems like he's excited about it because it's cool, like suddenly he's important and he's maybe basking a little too much in the glory and the power. After all, he doesn't use any ingenuity or skills he's learned to accomplish anything. He beats Orm because he's got the Justice League to fight the generic hordes of putties, trenchers, who have a really cool scary design in the comics and who are really genericified in this. And because his noble blood gives him the power of the magic royal trident, but which he uses when he and the Justice League are all mummified in weird ocean cocoons to break him out of his cocoon remotely. He remembers Orm saying only royalty can wield the power of the trident, so he concentrates really hard and the trident magics the cocoon open. Why would he even think to try that? I guess because the story needs to progress somehow. I would have thought wielding the power of the trident would mean like picking it up and doing stuff with it, not using it like a Wi-Fi device from a distance. Your protagonist has to be proactive and overcome adversity through his own natural or learned ability to some degree in order to be sympathetic. It's fine that he has special abilities and can use a magic trident because of his blood, but it shouldn't feel like plot armor or an easy device to get him from point A to point B. Everything just happens to Aquaman in this movie, rather than the story really being propelled forward by him. And when he finally does start making decisions himself in the third act, it's because he has nothing to lose. Life sucked, but now he finds he's not only nigh invulnerable, he has a super powerful scepter that does whatever he needs it to further the narrative, apparently. He can make sea life do whatever he wants it to, and there's a whole gigantic city of people ready to pledge their allegiance to him and do his every bidding. I still expect this guy to run away and cry in a glass of beer as soon as things don't work out for him. And he only pulls out of his sad sack slump because life in Atlantis, for him, without Orm, doesn't suck like his surface life did. Arthur doesn't claw his way up to victory or to a happier life. He just finally takes it when it seems like a better deal. That's not compelling. And sure, I would understand taking the throne begrudgingly because of the pressure and the responsibility, and because he's not emotionally prepared for it. That would demonstrate a little maturity and growth on his part, and I think that's what the movie is trying to present it as, but it doesn't play for me. Yes, he's freaked out at first, but remember, he only agrees to do that when he realizes he's basically invincible and there's no one to oppose him. It's also more compelling if either he likes his life on the surface and decides to sacrifice it, or if, again, and I think this is what it's supposed to be, but I don't buy it, he finally finds the place where he really belongs, even if it's harder to live there, after being an outcast and not being accepted above the water. But you want the reason he can bridge the gap between the two worlds, which needs to happen because Orm tried to force a war between them, and now everyone's gonna know that Atlantis is real, not to be just because he's, by blood, both human and Atlantean. It has to be more than symbolic, which works great in both the book and the live-action movie, but not here. He has a speech to Atlantis at the end, where he says he's Atlantean by birth, human by instinct. I questioned that at first, but I guess that's right. I mean, he doesn't even fully realize his power to talk to fish until the end of the movie. You'd think he'd have some Atlantean instincts, but he really doesn't, except to use the power of a trident he's not even holding to break him out of a trap. The reason he can bridge both worlds in John's run is because he understands them both, because he loves them both. He has equal allegiance to both worlds, and he won't put one above another, which makes him a perfect mediator. It's also like being ruled by a neutral party. He has no bias one way or another, which leads to interesting conflicts in that story. He has to pick his battles. Sometimes he has to side with the Justice League, and sometimes with his brother Orm, who he has a really complex and fascinating relationship with there, and who has an actual perspective, which is somewhat understandable. He wants to go to war there because he thinks Atlantis really is in danger and there's no other choice. Yes, he's still manipulative and conniving, a little Loki, but there's more to him than a simple, raging Atlantean nationalist. We're better than the humans, so let's, right now, for no good reason really, except this is when the movie begins, create a conspiracy to frame the humans for attacking us and then wipe them all out. This movie isn't inferior to the source material because it's different. It's not as good because everything that makes it interesting and exciting is replaced with formulaic tripe. It's another villain causing the incident he pretends to be the catalyst for his retaliation story, and it's another hero who starts from scratch and is thrust into a destiny he never imagined. The politics are overly simple, and Arthur is a bratty child who shouldn't be allowed to run a GameStop, much less the city of Atlantis. Oh, and of course, he has to hate the name Aquaman, and Green Lantern has to insist that's what they call him because he hates it. Because these characters are often contrary and bad-tempered to seem cool or to downplay the absurdity of the comic book stuff by dismissing it. A lot of different versions of Aquaman use the same characters in a lot of different ways. Sometimes Arthur's parents are both dead, sometimes one of them is left alive, sometimes they're both alive. This is the most implausible and confusing version I've seen, though I'm not an expert on this character or anything. Arthur's mother, Queen Atlanta, goes to the surface world and mates with a human. In this version, I don't know why she left, because she doesn't seem to have any problem with Atlantean tradition or anything. Maybe she just got lost one day, wound up on the surface, and fell in love with this guy. I don't know. All we're told is the bare minimum, which isn't enough to ascertain her motivations. She has Arthur with Thomas Curry, and then decides she can't stay and help raise him. Wait a minute. Bruce Wayne and Arthur Curry's fathers have the same first name? This movie had the opportunity to beat BVS to the parents have the same name twist. It could have been BVA, Dawn of Darkwater. Batman and Aquaman fight because Batman thinks Aquaman's too drunk and stupid to be king of his own country with fish-controlling powers. If there's even a 1% chance that he could send sharks to attack Gotham Harbor in a drunken rage, he must be taken down. So Batman fashions an Atlantean steel harpoon to kill Aquaman, and he takes his Batboat to the lighthouse. They have a huge epic fight, and Batman's about to impale him with his harpoon, when Arthur suddenly says, "Thomas!" And Batman's like, "Why did you say that name?" He looks behind him, and Thomas Curry is back there, like, choking on a piece of calamari or something. And Batman says, "Thomas will not die tonight." And he goes over and gives him, like, the Bat Heimlich maneuver. I don't have any animation skills. Make it happen, Internet. So Atlanta has to go back to Atlantis after having a secret child out of wedlock, just on a whim, I guess, and she's going to be the queen. She marries Orm's father, who she's betrothed to, and then when he's killed by a volcano, she takes over as queen. So the reason Orm has to create this ruse to justify going to war with the surface world is because he's not on the throne like he is in other versions. I'm not sure why. Different monarchies are probably run differently, but it seems like this kingdom is supposed to have a king, because it's called, a kingdom. So the only reason a queen would rule alone would be like an Elizabeth I situation, where there are no male heirs and she doesn't ever have any children. But Atlanta does have a male heir, there, right now in Atlantis. There's no explanation as to why Orm isn't already in charge. Has he not come of age? He doesn't look or sound like a teenager. I think the situation is presented like this for a couple reasons. First, to put all the major Aquaman events in the main action of the story, as opposed to mentioning any of it as background or in flashbacks. I usually appreciate a movie for avoiding flashbacks, at least flashbacks that are intrusive, stall out story momentum, pad things out, and or present information we don't need to see in scene and could be delivered in a more natural way. But this movie could have used some, or else forcing all the mythology and backstory into the present day events needed to not feel more clunky than doing it in the way John's run did. Atlanta is kept alive here so we can see her get stabbed in the present day, which isn't especially dramatic, partly because I saw it coming, and she should have too, considering that happens right after she reveals to Orm that she knows about his ruse, and partly because Atlanta is used as a plot device before she's a fully formed character. Really hard not to say Atlanta. Atlantis is nowhere near Georgia. But then that could have been said about a lot of the characters in this movie. And the other reason I think she's left alive is to contrive a reason for Orm to create a conspiracy. If he was king, he could just attack the surface of his own accord. But the movie wants to play it like complex regal politics, a Shakespearean betrayal kind of story. I don't have an inherent problem with Atlanta being alive, of course, and this isn't the only version that does that, but she's used as a device to create dramatic situations and not drawn enough for me to care about what happens to her. And she's made kind of stupid in her death scene. You'd think she'd have more security at the ready or something. It was a little too easy to get her from behind. I'm also not sure why she chose that moment to tell Orm she knows about his scheme. Black Manta's part in this is strange, if you know anything about Black Manta. He's usually a human treasure hunter who gets mixed up in Atlantean affairs trying to steal its riches, and becomes a major adversary of Aquaman's. Here, it's a lot of the movie before I'm sure what he is, if he's a human or an Atlantean, and when I know for sure, it's got me asking questions. He is a human treasure hunter, near as I can figure, but he's also Ocean Master's right-hand man. He's treated like the leader of the Royal Guard or something. Ocean Master hires him to do things for him in the comics, but he doesn't live in Atlantis, and he doesn't answer to the king or queen like he does here. I wouldn't think he'd even be allowed there for any length of time. But again, I'm not an expert. I'm confused as to why this Orm would put so much faith in a lowly human. Orm is essentially an Atlantean supremacist. His biggest point of contention with his mother is that he was raised to believe that the humans are inferior, that they are like gods compared to surface dwellers. And that's why he sees it as nearly treasonous that she mated with a human. But his right-hand man is an Atlantean. That could be a really interesting contradiction. I'm not saying it's bad just on the face of it, but why have Orm make such a major exception for one human when he wants to eradicate the whole species, it seems, and not explore why he's doing that? Black Manta also makes Orm seem like an idiot. He's apparently really easily manipulated because it turns out, and this is what passes for intrigue in this film, that it was all Manta's idea for Atlantis to go to war with the surface. He just kept whispering things into Orm's ear until he finally set this frame-up plot in motion. First off, I don't buy that this Orm wouldn't have done that anyway. My question wasn't why now and not later. He's clearly looking for any excuse to kill humans. I wondered why he was doing it now instead of earlier. And then, Manta, in true dumb supervillain fashion, reveals his whole plot to Aquaman just before he's about to kill him. But don't forget, folks, this is a more serious, adult, sophisticated superhero movie that is not for kids. He goes on a long monologue about how it was all his idea and how he tricked Orm into starting a war so he could sink the surface world and take Atlantis' treasure. So he wants everyone in the society he's from to die, assuming he's human, so he can get treasure that's underwater and sell it to whom? Does he just want to keep it for some reason? Does he know about some other people underwater he can sell it to when there's no standard of currency above and no one left to spend money? And how does sinking the surface world get him underwater treasure that's probably heavily guarded by people stronger and better at swimming than him? I don't think villain motivations and plots get much more retroactive than this. It's like writer Heath Corson here had Manta there the whole time but wasn't sure what to do with him, and then he got to the end and was like, hey, what if he was the bad guy all along? And then wrote a half-baked reason for Manta's deception in like 5 minutes and slapped it in his mouth just before he gets eaten by a shark. That's supposed to be so funny and distracting that we won't even think about Manta's motivation. Can't fool me, movie. I know lazy writing when I see it. A lot of the Justice League characters are just along for the ride, even though the movie is trying desperately to make it as much about them as it is about sad sap Arthur Curry. And there are germs of paralleling character arcs, but they never go past an initial idea, and we sometimes pretend like a character went through an arc that wasn't actually presented on screen. Superman wants to teach Wonder Woman how to live amongst regular people, so he helps her develop a secret identity, just like in John's comics. She wears glasses and is surprised the disguise works. This is supposed to foreshadow Aquaman's arc. Superman already knows how to live in two worlds, Wonder Woman is getting there, and Arthur hasn't even gotten started. It also kind of serves as a mirror for Atlantis and Orm. Orm sees himself as a god above the people, but Wonder Woman has learned that she's neither god or mortal, but something in between. I like the moment where she and Superman are hovering above the city, and she says that the view must be like the one from Olympus, except it's strange because she isn't really a god. So Superman tries to show her that she can walk among mortals, and not just pretend to be one, but actually be one. She doesn't understand the difference, she says, and then that's never really followed through on. She doesn't learn anything from Arthur's journey about that, which seems like the natural course to take it. Maybe give them a conversation about it somewhere, but nope, it seems like it's just a thing to have these two do until it becomes the Atlantis show, and it's sort of thematically connected, so I guess that's supposed to be good enough. We're supposed to be invested in some of these characters, I guess because they're getting involved in romantic relationships? There's no great relationship drama or anything, just they're dating, or they might be dating, or they're not sure they should date, and that's drama? Superman and Wonder Woman are dating. Aquaman and Mera obligatorily make out after Arthur's big speech at the end, and Cyborg goes the whole movie unsure if he should ask out Sarah, the doctor who works on his upgrades, and then I guess he gets some resolve off-screen because I don't see anything that would lead him to finally decide to pursue her. All the pathos and tragedy is drained out of Cyborg because he's embracing the fact that he's more machine than man, not really worried about all the replacements for his organic organs robbing him of his humanity. He says, as long as he still has his brain and his heart. It's like the RoboCop remake. Like, it goes out of its way to do the least interesting thing possible with this situation. In the comics, he's apprehensive about losing his last lung so he can go deeper underwater. Understandably, I think most people would be uneasy about constantly replacing the body parts they were born with. But that random detail is taken from the book, I guess, just to have a reason that he can go to Atlantis and not drown, but it purposefully robs it of what makes it dramatic. And, by the way, everyone has a way to breathe underwater except Superman and Wonder Woman, who might be able to hold their breath a long time, but they just act like Atlanteans do, talking normally a bazillion fathoms under the surface, which makes no sense. So anyway, Cyborg isn't worried about losing more body parts, but at the same time, it seems like he isn't sure about dating because he doesn't know if he's human enough. Those two things don't really go together, unless the idea is that he's embracing his robotic side, like he doesn't care as much if he is human and he's sacrificing human pursuits. I don't think that's what's happening, though. By the end, he just changes his mind, like there was some kind of opportunity for change I missed, like it's the point in the movie that's supposed to happen, and it hopes that you didn't notice that it didn't really get us there. And Batman and Green Lantern's arc is, we still hate each other for no reason, and then we still hate each other for no reason. I guess for Batman, it's that Hal is too impulsive and doesn't calculate anything. Like when he stops the Scarecrow henchmen Batman is chasing by slamming them into a wall of lantern energy. Batman says he wasn't trying to stop them, he was trying to get information, like where the Scarecrow is. But Flash and Shazam are also kind of like that, and Batman singles out Hal just because they got off in the wrong foot in the comics, and now that's the defining point of their relationship. They don't come to appreciate each other anymore by the end, they just both agree to be on a team together, even though they drive each other nuts. And side note, did Batman just let Scarecrow keep terrorizing that senator or whatever he was doing? He chastises Hal for ruining his work, and then he just shows up with the Justice League and it never comes up again. It's annoying how much stuff is contrived just to make the Justice League seem important, in a world where there is no Justice League yet. The movie is at odds with its own setup, but the we don't want to have a Justice League idea is pointless and wastes time. So the way you fix this is just start with an operating Justice League. At the end, they decide, okay, fine, there are big threats like this, I guess we should have a league. When they just as easily could have used the same logic after the Darkseid threat. Two does not a pattern make, and I don't know how recently that happened anyway. Just say, we're not gonna, hang out together all the time or anything, because we're too cool for friends and getting along, but whenever some global threat happens, we'll come together. All they had to do was all answer Cyborg's call in the first place, and poof, you have a Justice League. And then Trevor could easily pretend like they were officially an entity all along. There just wasn't any worldwide catastrophe for them to solve. And what's with the scene where Atlantis says, instead of going to war immediately like Orm wants, it's time to put the two worlds together and she'll meet the Justice League. The Justice League? Does she even know about them? All they've done so far is investigate Dr. Shin. I don't think they do anything publicly before that scene. I guess Trevor's PR campaign is working better than he thought. The animation isn't bad, but I've never cared for the hazy look of these movies, like someone rubbed Vaseline all over the lens. Again, the action is serviceable but unmemorable. But my biggest complaint is the designs of the Aquaman characters. The Blu-ray box shows a dynamic Aquaman in his colorful traditional chainmail suit, but in the movie, it's a stripped-down, under-detailed, muted color version. Black Manta's helmet is too understated, Mera's outfit is genericified and boring. How does a live-action movie embrace the over-the-top, bombastic look of these characters more than an animated movie released on video? And if it's supposed to be more understated designs because it's more serious, then make a more sophisticated movie. I doubt if this thing got very many people curious about Aquaman. He's no fun, his world is lacking in awe and wonder, and his supporting characters and villains feel like knockoffs of Thor characters. Oh, and the voice cast continues to fall flat too. Everyone sounds unnatural and stale, even Nathan Fillion is Green Lantern, who's been great in movies before this continuity. It's like the voice director is looking for stilted performances. Adapting this material is just not this hard. It started in an uninspired continuity and with the wrong basic goals in mind, and it all went downhill from there. as a lot of comic book adaptations are fun and colorful again, not to mention that a better screen adaptation of a lot of this material has been made now, this one's not gonna age well. I know I've done this with several movies in the 12 Days of Superhero Rewind, but I can't bring myself to go with even an average score. I'm giving Justice League Throne of Atlantis a 1.5 out of 4. Alright, bam, got another one knocked out. Thanks a lot for listening to the 12 Days of Superhero Rewind. Got just 3 more left, so join me again tomorrow for the next one. And if you'd like to support Superhero Rewind and Geekvolution on Patreon, go to patreon.com/Geekvolution. For just $2 a month, you can get early access to regular episodes of Superhero Rewind, as well as our uncensored Patreon-only series Geekvolution After Dark, which comes out twice a month. At the $50 tier, you can request a movie for review on Superhero Rewind or Science Fiction Rewind, and at $10, you can be a Patreon producer. And I'd like to say thanks to all of our producers right now, including Dylan Musciello, Nick Manna, Eamon Singleton, Cletus Winslow, Remy LeBlanc, Derek Jacob, The Day Ghost, Michael Gulick, Magpie's Nest Productions, Kareem Roberts, Lot 10 Underground, Michael, Mark Micheletti, Carl Maxey, Dimitri J, John Johnson, Jacob Schneider, Nathan Hanford, Aram Zangana, Joey Crouch, Sartaj Govind Singh, Ethan, Guidi, Caleb, Malik Myers, Lone Wolf Jedi of Gotham, Chewbacca's Lover, David Crabtree, Simeon Scott, Justin Hayes, Marie Flowers, Clark Whitfield, Ian McKee, and Jeffrey Patron. Hope you enjoyed it. I will see you again tomorrow. Thanks a lot once again for listening. I'm Captain Logan.